Welcome to Mind Tricks Radio, where we'll explore contemporary topics in psychology through interviewing creative and innovative thinkers in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan. Thanks for tuning in. We're here today with Dr. Adam Dorsay, a licensed psychologist and executive coach based in Silicon Valley, where he works with high-achieving adults, executives, entrepreneurs, professionals, and even athletes. He's also the host of the award-winning podcast Super Psyched, with more than 300 episodes, and he's delivered 3 widely viewed TEDx talks on men and emotions, adult friendships, and the 4 ways humans connect. His latest book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love, has been both a bestseller and an International Impact Award winner. It's a hopeful, practical exploration of how we cultivate deeper connection in a world that often feels increasingly fragmented. I've been especially eager to speak with Adam because I've been thinking a lot about connection in my own recent work. In my novel, When Earth Blinked, I explore loneliness and disconnection in a post-apocalyptic setting. What happens when human bonds fray under pressure? It's a cautionary lens. Adam's work points towards something empowering, that connection isn't accidental. It's something we can intentionally build across multiple dimensions of our lives right now. So I am delighted to welcome Dr. Adam Dorsay. Hey, Adam, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Aaron, come on. This is something I've been looking forward to.
Me too. It's been a while since we've done this. I think I've had you on the show 3 times in the past. We talked about adult friendships one time, which is sort of one of your major areas of expertise that you like to talk about. We talked about positive psychology, and I think the last time was when COVID had just come out, and we were sort of talking about that because that was a tough time for people. And I'm looking back over the old show notes, and we were actually calling it coronavirus at that time. I don't think we weren't even referring to it as COVID when we did that episode, so that was kind of interesting.
Well, we drank Corona beer in college, and coronavirus is
I know,
a familiar word to us, so that makes it's all the more hilarious.
Corona is dogging us, brah. We got Corona in the background there. But since then, you've been a busy man. You published this excellent book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Kinds of Connection and Live the Life You Love. And of course, Super Psyched is the title of your popular psychology podcast. So that was really cool. Adam, first off, it's been out for about a year now or so, a little longer?
Yeah, it's been about a year, almost a year and a half, and you're mentioned several times in the book because you've been a very important part of my history. You were the friend who turned my brain from the off position to the on position just through talking with you in the cafeteria back in college.
Yeah.
We would close the place out and talk about things, and you just had the kind of brain that made sense to me to allow my brain to show up. And it was, during our time as budding friends that we would have these really intellectually stimulating conversations. You would introduce me to your vast knowledge of literature, and we'd play pool and share music. And it was a really vital time. So it's really cool that you've played the role that you have in my younger adult life and in my adult life, where I describe this moment where you and I were having sushi in Waikiki. I was unfulfilled in my career, and you told me it wasn't too late to become a psychologist, and I nearly jumped across the table telling you, please, let's not talk about this anymore. Not so euphemistically, shut up. I don't want to hear about this anymore, but you just hung in there, and finally just kind of wore me down. It's become kind of a classic story.
Yeah, you look like you were going to strangle me, but I'm glad that it all worked out and you went the direction you did. And by the way, those times in the dining halls are fond memories of mine too. My son is going off to college, as you know, next year, and I've told him some of my favorite times in college was actually just hanging out in the cafeteria with you after it had closed and everybody was gone, and we talked about everything under the sun, and those are really great times. And so, I appreciate that. I loved being mentioned a couple of times in your book, and that was really, really meaningful. And by the way, I've recommended the book to several of my patients who have really benefited from it. So really great job on that, Adam. I'm super proud of you.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. It was 20 months of, as I describe it, as heartbeats, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was ultimately very fulfilling, and it tested me in a way to see, could I put out this kind of love letter to the reader that might be helpful. It's certainly my hope that it would be. And so far, the feedback has been really positive, and it's been very meaningful to hear that. It's the topic that I had no choice but to write about. Irv Yalom, for those who don't know who he is, I know you do, is kind of one of the MVPs or the GOATs of our career as psychotherapists. He said that every book he ever wrote bit him in the ass. And I thought that was a really powerful image, almost like a pit bull just seizing the pant leg of a person or the rump of a person. And this word connection just felt like this is the space to be investing those heartbeats in writing about.
Yeah, well, sure. We can definitely tell the passion you have for the subject that came through the book. But let's dig into it a bit. This concept of connection in this world we live in now is sort of strange, Adam, I think, because, if you think about it, we're more connected technologically than ever. We've got social media. We can instantaneously connect with people all around the world. Globally speaking, we're interconnected. It's easy to go places. It's easy to connect with people if you want to or need to. And yet, we have this sort of crisis in connection. People talk about being lonely. Obviously, mental health issues are on the rise. So just at a broad level here, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, it's a paradox. We are more connected than ever technologically, and yet loneliness rates are higher than ever before. It's been considered by many a Surgeon General to be a crisis and leading to premature death in the worst cases, and in most day-to-day cases, people feeling just unaffiliated and lonely. Big difference, by the way, between loneliness and solitude. Solitude is something that many of us enjoy, just the joy of being alone, the going for a hike by yourself, the chosen solitude versus loneliness, which is a very toxic feeling where you feel like nobody is in your corner, or there's nobody with whom to connect. And all types of mental and physical health issues seem to emerge that could be prevented. It seems, from where I sit, that it's highly correlated with the burgeoning of social media and the iPhone, both of which are neutral technologies in and of themselves and have some really positive aspects, as does any technology. Electricity can be used to light up a hospital and provide life-saving services. It can also be used to kill someone, as can a knife. So neutral in and of it themselves, but people are using them as proxies. The human brain has a cognitive bias to go for what's easy, and we've been more likely to survive if we go with what's easy. Sadly, these days, even though our brains are about 35 to 70,000 years old in their current form, our external realities have changed dramatically. So going for what's easy, such as social media, rather than going for what's hard, reaching out to a friend, even just by phone, but ideally in person, requires a lot of activation energy. It requires the willingness to schedule it, to get out of your comfy chair and leave the streaming media behind and get in your car and fuel it up, which costs a lot these days, or however you get to see your friend, and then finding parking and all of these inconveniences along the way, which we took for granted back in the day. It's just like that's what we did. But now that we can like somebody's post on social media, we believe we're getting the same social rewards that we got, but we're not getting even 1/100th of those. We really need, people do need people.
Yeah, the methods of connecting on surface appear easier, but they're actually a lot more complicated because of all of these factors that you're talking about. So that makes sense. And I know in your book you give lots of great examples of patients, which I'm assuming, well, some of them you gave permission, obviously, to be stated, and some of them are fictitious. But regardless, in your clinical work, what does disconnection actually look like at a clinical level?
In so many ways. It depends on which aspect of the connection, whether it's with self, others, the world, or something greater. But let's just talk about friends, since you and I are friends and we do live fairly far away in different time zones, to be clear. But the average person I see has lived in 3 or more places. They may have been born on the, in the Midwest. They may have gone to school on the East Coast, had their first job in Texas, and then they're working here in Silicon Valley. And in each place, they left behind friends who they swore they would stay in touch with. Oh, we'll be different, we'll stay in touch. But they didn't, because of going for what's easy. We want to go for what's easy. Yeah. And staying in touch is not easy. It takes a lot of intention. It takes a lot of willingness to be disciplined in that way. And so I see all these super friendable people in my office who are really, really cool. And they say that they're lonely. They say they have no friends. And they say that they've left friends behind in every stage of the game. And they also say that they are afraid to pick up the phone because what if the other person doesn't feel the same way? Or what if they're in different places in life? What if they find out that they get something started again and it's not so great? Blah, blah, blah. Come up with tons of reasons why. Or they're ostensibly too busy. And I say ostensibly because even just if we know that there are salutary effects of even a 5 to 10 minute phone call, just saying, hey, what's going on? Because we all have 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And Stevie Wonder really got it right. We don't have to have a reason to call. We can call just to say I love you. And like, what about that? I mean, one of the things that I experienced, I don't know that you had as cool roommates as I did. Although you had a really cool one. That's right. Yeah. But do you remember, like, when you, as I remember, you definitely did not win the lottery one of those years. I remember John was a great roommate for you. But I remember, like, being in my room with my roommate was on the other side of the room in his single bed. I was on the side. The lights were out, and we would talk and maybe say things that we wouldn't have said if we were talking face to face.
True.
And we can still do that by phone. We seem to be using our phones for everything except for its telephonic capabilities. And I'm a big fan of that. If the geography is less than desirable, I'm also a big fan of trying to hang out with people either in group contexts or one-on-one contexts at whatever feeding schedule you need. It was funny, my friend and colleague Britt Frank says that some of us have feeding schedules like a hummingbird where we need to see our friends all the time. I think you probably remember one of the guys we used to hang out with, like, party, party, party. Every night he wanted to party.
Yep.
And that was his feeding schedule. That was not mine.
Yeah.
Versus a scorpion's feeding schedule. Apparently scorpions and Gila monsters need to eat very infrequently. And I think Gila monsters, upon whom the GLP-1s are based, their pharmacologic action is based on the feeding of a Gila monster that eats just like once a year. Sometimes some people don't need to see their friends all that often. They're actually more comfortable in solitude, but they still need to hang out with somebody once in a while. So we need to know what our feeding schedule is and to see friends on that level. So that would be what I would call level 2 connection. That is connecting with others.
Yeah, connection to others. That's one of the 4 that we talk about. And what distinguishes like a real connection from just proximity? Because I'm imagine a lot of these people who you're talking about in Silicon Valley who have been 5 different places and landed there, probably a lot of them have a lot of people around them, but still it's not quite working for them. So where's the difference there?
I remember living in Osaka, and I've never been around more people. And I've also never been more lonely. So just being around lots of people does not necessarily mean that we'll be less lonely.
Yeah.
You can be, some of the loneliest experiences can be either when we are at a party and we're connecting with no one, or when we're in a relationship and we feel really estranged from our partner. It can feel far more lonely than being actually alone by choice. Here in Silicon Valley, we have a lot of folks who might be more on the introverted side of the spectrum.
So like the tech industry sort of draws more of those kinds of personalities?
It would appear to be so, based on my, I've not read the stats on it, but based on my experience of living here, that people are more likely to keep to themselves. They might say hi and give a smile, but want to keep walking on. But that doesn't mean that they don't want company. And it just means that their feeding schedules may be less intense than, say, the person who really wants to hang out all the time. One of the other risks that I've noticed is that people might be less self-compassionate and less tolerant of failure. They've succeeded so many times that one of the things that they're not willing to do is risk failure. Because sometimes when you hang out with somebody, sometimes it's going to be a colossal fail. It's going to be like, no, this is not a connection. When you drive away, you think to yourself, yeah, there is not much here. Or you might feel rejected yourself. You might like the person and the other person doesn't feel similarly for whatever reason. And a lot of these folks have graduated from great institutions. They're used to series of success. And one of the things that you and I both know as psychologists and as people who try to learn new things is a part of the learning process is failure along the way.
Yeah.
When people, you speak multiple languages and I speak a few myself. And one of the reasons we do is because we were willing to pay the price of looking like idiots along the way.
Yeah, you got to take the risk and try, even if you sound like an idiot. And people usually don't think you sound like an idiot.
That's right.
They appreciate the fact that you're making the effort. And so I guess that's true too when it comes to trying to connect with people. You've got to make the effort and try and take a risk. And what about romantic relationships, Adam? What do you think is the most common thing that erodes the connection there or inhibits, blocks the ability for romantic partners to be able to connect the way they ideally could?
I think there are a few things. I would say selection and maintenance are the two issues. I think that when we are in a stage of limerence, kind of that in love, that honeymoon period, we can imagine that, we can forecast the rest of our lives will be happily ever after. And one of the things that we know from the Disney movies is that they kind of perpetuate the erroneous belief that happily ever after could be a thing. And one of the things that I love that comes from Erich Fromm, he says he was a great analyst from Germany who survived the Holocaust. But one of his contributions in the book The Art of Loving was that love is not a feeling. It is a willingness to override our own narcissism for the sake of the relationship. I'm paraphrasing this badly. So within the selection process, we tend to forecast this idea that everything's going to be happily ever after, which maybe it won't. Maybe we operate on hope as a strategy. Like, well, I hope that the negative traits of my partner go away, but the sex is so great, or I was told to commit or get off the pot and get on a knee. Many people tell me that they had second thoughts even as they were proposing to their soon-to-be spouse. And they did it at the pressure of the spouse or their family or whomever. It was the right time in life to get married, so I did. And then there is the fear of overriding our own narcissism. One of the things we love to do is to be right. A big part of being in a relationship is recognizing that the relationship matters more than being right, and overriding our own inherent narcissism and being willing to say that the relationship matters more. Sometimes that means couples therapy. Sometimes that means doing some exercises that might bring up vulnerability for the sake of greater intimacy over time. But realizing that the relationship itself matters more than either individual in it, that it's more of an exponential mathematical proposition rather than addition.
Yeah, excellent point. And that makes perfect sense. And I'm wondering about something else too. We talk about, especially as psychologists, this concept of vulnerability, right? Like if you're vulnerable, that means you're open and you're emotionally more open, and you're sort of a little softer. It's easier for other people to have empathy for you when you're being vulnerable. But I'm wondering, from your point of view on this topic of connections, how important really is vulnerability for connection? Like, is it overstated? Like, I mean, different people obviously have their own different personalities and their different comfort levels in being vulnerable. Sometimes there's some gender differences. Curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it depends on the connection. Like, let's say you've got a neighbor across the street with whom you have the I'll loan you a cup of sugar if you loan me a cup of sugar relationship. I will make sure that your car lights aren't on inside the cabin of your car so that you don't, just we keep an eye on each other. You might not want to necessarily be super vulnerable with that person. Mm-hmm. There might be certain limitations to that relationship, and yet it might be a very good relationship. But this would not necessarily be somebody with whom you could be vulnerable. We tend to have fairly good spidey sense over with whom we can be vulnerable. I recently asked an intimacy expert, what does the word intimacy mean? Because so many people use the word intimacy when they mean an erotic exchange. But many exchanges can be erotic and not intimate, and many intimate exchanges can be very intimate but not erotic.
Absolutely.
And his answer was so good. He said, intimacy is vulnerability met well. One of the reasons that you and I had a successful friendship is because we didn't have to show our best selves to each other. We could say, this is my less than best self, and we still loved each other. We'd still go play pool or, go for a walk and talk or grab some ice cream. And we both still thought well of each other. And one of the biggest contributors to our field from my vantage point is Carl Rogers, who had this idea of unconditional positive regard towards his clients. And I think that good friends have that too. Can you imagine if the TV show Friends involved everybody just trying to look their best all the time? We would have no show. It was a good show because people were willing to show their soft underbelly and say, here's where I'm vulnerable, and here are my less than perfect parts. So I would say that it would be really, really, really important to have a few people in your life, at least one, with whom you can be more real, and with whom you can have that type of intimacy, that type of friendship, that type of relationship. It could be your spouse. Better that it be that in addition to spouse, somebody else as well. One of the problems in modern days, particularly for us males, is that we rely too heavily on our, assuming this is a kind of a heteronormative relationship, that we tend to rely too heavily on our wives for all of our social needs. But as Esther Perel warns us, we used to live in villages where we'd have somebody with whom to go drinking, someone with whom to go fishing, someone with whom to do our gardening projects. Right. Now we try to lean on our spouses for all of those things. Right. And no spouse can handle all of that burden. So if we love our spouses, male, female, non-binary, whatever, however we identify, we really owe it to our significant others to have friends so that our most significant romantic partners are not handling all the weight. But that being said, I think it's really important that we feel safe to be vulnerable with, God, at least one person in this world, because our brains are so social.
Yeah. Talking about that village imagery that you said, I'm thinking about the old shtetl, where they'd go into the middle of town and bang on the tea kettle, and then everybody would come out so you could gripe about what all the problems were. This is sort of like old time, but it's not like that anymore. You can't go out into the middle of the road and bang on a tea kettle. Somebody would call the police and you get hauled off, and you need to be able to do that with people who you can trust now. So yeah, interesting.
And to your point, these days we do that on social media. We put out a post griping about something political, hoping that we will get people to say me too.
Yeah.
The fact is that we're trying to scratch at something there.
Yeah.
But the real thing that we really long for is just for somebody to look at us and say, oh my gosh, you are not alone. I get it.
Adam, let's talk about connection to self. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. The connection to other ones is sort of an obvious category, and I think we did a nice job talking about that, and you explained that really, really well. These other categories, I think, aren't as obvious to people. So let's go through them and talk about them. When you talk about the importance of a connection to self, What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Sure, and let's just for the state of just for the sake of taxonomy, if for the 4 points of connection that you mentioned in the title of the book, if we could think of connection as being like a target, and a target with 4 circles, into the center would be ourself. That how well we connect to ourself informs all of the other connections, whether it's to others, which is the second ring. Others can include friends, significant others, pets, and other individuals and groups. The third level of connection is to the worlds. That could include our work, it could include our community, it could include our ancestry. And the fourth is to something greater. For some of us who are kind of traditionally religious, it might be our religion. But even to the most dogmatic, hardcore atheist, it could be going to the Taj Mahal and feeling awe, or to the Grand Canyon and feeling this sense of, wow, this is just amazing. Seeing a sunset and really taking it in and just feeling the wonder of the world. Connecting to ourself, that we have so many blocks to connect with ourselves. One of them we were just speaking about indirectly, and that is the spotlight effect, imagining that other people are looking at us more than they actually are. Mm-hmm. Aaron, this is so stupid and so embarrassing, but I was the reason I didn't have a bike in college, and you don't know this, is because I was afraid that people would look at me and how silly I looked on a bike.
Wow.
Nobody would have cared at all about seeing me in my big frame riding around on a bicycle. I just imagined that I would look like a spectacle. I'm over 6 feet tall, and I just probably in my mind, I thought I would look stupid.
So self-consciousness and self-judging. That's a
right. And this seems like a stupid example, except for the fact that it relates to everything that all of us do.
Yeah.
We inhibit ourselves from doing the things or knowing the things that we'd like to about ourselves because of one of these things is that we fear what others will think of us, given our social brains. And as Teddy Roosevelt once said, people would stop worrying about what others thought of us if we realized how little or seldom they did.
Yeah.
People don't think about us. They're thinking about themselves.
Yep.
I was willing to do it for foreign languages, but I wasn't willing to do it for a bicycle. And that was 4 years of bike riding I could have really enjoyed on that beautiful college campus that I never got to experience. So that was just one of the things that I did not get to experience because of my unwillingness to connect with myself. One of the other things that we do is we sometimes choose a major because we want to do something that our family would approve of, or something that we imagine that a future spouse will appreciate, rather than going to the geek zone of our choice. Fortunately, these days, I've noticed that kids today are more likely to opt into something that is truly their bliss, which gives me hope. But there's so many other ways that we don't get to connect with ourselves. We put on these social media fronts, living our best lives, and we contribute to these lies, and they keep us from knowing who we actually are. We're trying to have a particular persona out there, persona being a mask.
And so that's sort of like authenticity, I guess, self-authenticity, being authentic with oneself about who they are and kind of what makes them happy or what makes them feel connected or motivated.
That's right. That's right. And what keeps us feeling vital, what makes us feel most alive. You and I chose very different places to live, and they were both authentic for who we were. You chose to live in Nepal. I chose to live in Japan. What if I had said, you know what, monkey see, monkey do. I'm going to do what Aaron does, because if Aaron did it, that's what I need to do too. Many of us do that. Unlike the bicycle example, my choice of living in Japan was true to me at that time. And
I
if
remember
I could
how
live
meaningful experience Japan was for you. That's like in your bones, Japan, and it still is, I think.
And likewise, I see a Nepali mask behind you, so I know for sure that you having chosen Nepal was really, really informative, and each of us probably have been informed professionally by this. So I'm really grateful. One of the things I've really tried to do with my own children is to help them get to know who they were and what they were about without me interfering. it was really hard when it came time for them for my older son to choose a college. But I just stood back and watched how he interacted with the campus and the people there, and to see, like, because we know that fit is the biggest predictor of success at college, not the the reputation of the school. And so for many of us, we would just choose the reputation over fit, and I would really argue that the other way around would be the better order of things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Adam, how would somebody know if they're disconnected from themselves? That's kind of a weird question, but so people feel disconnected or they are disconnected, and then how does that show up in terms of the way a person's living their life? Like, how would they know that?
There are many ways, but one of them is if they are asking, I mean, to keep things simple, if you find yourself asking, am I really doing the right thing? That's probably a pretty good chance that you're not. It's not necessarily so. You might be questioning yourself, and yes, indeed, it is actually the right thing. But if you're asking that too many times, or if many people say, gosh, you don't seem really happy about this decision, or if you notice that you're feeling depressed, like one of the things that we know through certain types of kinesthetic psychological realities is that when we're trying to exert our strongest bench press, and we say something that is true versus something that is false, we are less likely to be as strong when we say something is false than we are when we say something is true.
Yeah.
So we tend to. So.
Well, Adam, I kind of hear you saying is like, it's almost like, if something isn't connecting with yourself. It's just a question of whether you sort of ignore it and sweep it under the carpet, either for yourself or somebody else is saying something and you brush it off. There's a part of you that kind of knows that is true, and it's just a question of whether or not you pay attention to it and honor it, or you choose to avoid it and ignore it. I mean, at a kind of a sort of a very base level, I'm kind of hearing that.
I like asking, is there vitality here? There's music that I've either loved the first time around, or I've come to love after listening to it enough times and really kind of appreciating the music. But sometimes we just know that a flavor is not for us, a particular dish is not for us. Sometimes we know that a person who is very beloved to other people is not our person to hang out with. And sometimes we're able to develop an appreciation, and oftentimes we're not. I shared a song with my son that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and he thought it was crap. And I'm not going to try to convince him otherwise.
I hope it wasn't the Surf Punks.
It wasn't the Surf Punks, thankfully. No, my kids really laughed a lot. That was a band that Aaron and I used to listen to a lot in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question is there vitality here? I know that sounds a little bit esoteric, but do I feel alive? Does this make me come alive? If you feel like dancing, like the very first time I heard the Beastie Boys in college, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I knew my life had changed. Mm-hmm. There was vitality there. It was like, I'd never heard anything like this before. And even though I liked imagining goofing on these guys, there was no way you could goof on them. They were way too cool. They were amazing. And my entire body just came alive when I'd hear License to Ill, and I felt that way about subsequent albums of theirs. They were amazing.
Yeah.
And it worked for me. Nobody needed to explain that. Nobody needed to say, hey, this is good music, and you'll need to take a class on this, and you'll need it in order to understand why. I remember back in 2012 when Psy came up with his Gangnam Style, and you and I were both like just dying over the video, but the song itself just popped.
Yeah.
And the video was just all the better still. I mean, nobody needed to explain to me that this was one of the greatest works of art and music and comedy all in one. Somehow he just totally crushed it and was the first person to reach 1 billion. And so did Baby Shark. I don't like Baby Shark. I like singing it to annoy my kids.
Yeah.
But it's not a to me that is not a great song, and yet a billion people feel otherwise.
Yeah.
So is there vitality? I'm going to guess that for about a billion people there is for Baby Shark, but I'm going to stick with Gangnam Style.
Yeah, so people need to pay attention to that, I think, is kind of what you're saying. Like, people feel that vitality, they feel caught by something, and it feels right or it doesn't. And the important thing is to sort of pay attention to those messages that you're getting from the things that are happening to you or that you're experiencing, and try not to shove them under the carpet or pretend that they're not real and force yourself to like something or do something that isn't the case, but you have other motivations for doing it. So,
well, one of the reasons that you helped me realize that I needed to become a psychologist is nobody needed to tell me to study psychology. I wanted to study psychology, and you knew that I would probably be better at that than just about anything else because I loved studying it for the intrinsic nature of studying psychology. One of the things that we know through the science of studying the intrinsic versus the extrinsic is all about the external results, but the intrinsic is doing the thing because you love the thing. And the more intrinsic the love is, the more vitality we'll feel, and the better we'll get at the thing because we'd want to do it anyway. I remember I was considering going into radiological sales, selling large MRIs and CAT scanners, and I had subscribed to a newsletter around radiological equipment, and it wasn't interesting to me. And so even though the money would have been great, I wasn't intrinsically motivated to do this.
Well, I think at one time you were even talking about owning a laundromat, if I recall.
I talked about all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Like I just could not figure out. And the fact of the matter was, I always wanted to become a psychologist. There was a part of me that didn't believe that as somebody with dyslexia or as someone with ADHD, that this would even be in the realm of possibility that I'd be able to close the deal because of the intellectual challenge that earning a doctorate posed. It seemed overwhelming, and having watched other people go through it like you and other people in my life, my wife, it seemed like that was something for you and for her, but not something for me. And the conviction had gotten to the point where I knew I had to do this thing, and I was willing to pay the gods in order to get there.
Yeah, and look what you did. Not only did you become a clinical psychologist and have a successful practice, but you've written a book, you have a successful podcast. You're obviously motivated by things that they're not going to bring you financial riches. I mean, we both know that having a podcast doesn't earn any money, but it's something you do because of the passion for it. You know,
right, unless your name is Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
For us
Rogan,
average muggles, that's right. It's not going to bring us much money, but it's so much fun, and it brings me so much joy. One of the things that my kids used to say is they'd love it when I would come to pick them up after school after I'd recorded a podcast interview, because they could see that I was still carrying so much mojo and so much excitement from that.
Nice. Yeah. Adam, let's talk about this connection to the world. Now we're getting a little bit more into sort of the esoterics for what most people typically think about regarding connection, but these are obviously important points on your bullseye target that you were talking about. What does connection to the world include? How do you define that?
Sure. So the first place I think of is work. A big part of our IDs historically and currently are, what do we do for work? Sometimes when somebody asks you, what do you do for work? You might answer, in your case or my case, I am a psychologist. So just by virtue of the linguistic idea, I am a blank, it tells you how much it weighs in on our ID and our connection to ourselves, but also to that third level, to work. And given the fact that 90,000 hours of our lives on average are spent at work, it's no surprise that it's a big part of our identification. This third level includes travel. When we go to a place, we are impacted by that place. It opens portals to our psyches, and we learn about who we are when we are in Italy, for example. For a period, there was a time when I visit Hawaii, you live in Hawaii. But both of those are third level connections, whether as a visitor or as a resident. We are impacted by that. And so it's a bidirectional component of our connection. You have a Hawaiian driver's license. I have a Hawaiian visitor
state ID or something.
Not even a state ID, but yeah, I guess I show up as a tourist in Hawaii, but both of us are impacted by that, bidirectionally, both in terms of the first level of connection to ourselves and the third level connection to the world. But our ancestry, as Maya Angelou once said, you can't know where you're going unless you know where you're from. Many of us really identify with various aspects of our ethnicity, our religions, things that trace back to our ancestors. I think of dancing with our ancestors, one of the ways that we can keep certain things alive. St. Patrick's Day is just around the corner, and for many Irish Americans, this is more than just a time to drink, but this is a time to feel Irish. For people who are Hawaiian natives, learning to dance hula is a way of really keeping something very vital in one's life, even though it may just be one aspect. But it's an important part of feeling connected to self and to that third level, to being connected to the world. One of the things I also recommend is being connected to your community. I've really made it a point to get to know people in my neighborhood when I would walk my dog. One of the things that I did when both of my dogs died was I did a postmortem, literally, of just who did my dog introduce me to while my dog was alive. And that's one of the ways that I've felt a sense of community, has been by knowing people who live nearby and knowing more than just their names and their job titles, but knowing about them. So one of the things I recommend people do is find their own formulas for what makes them feel most connected. Some people don't need that. Some people don't want to walk around their neighborhood and get to know everybody who lives in their neighborhood. They just want to have their well-grooved series of friends. Some of them aren't pet people. That's fine too. But if you have any desire for these types of connections, I recommend that people power through the fear to try to get those connections and realize that sometimes along the way, you might have a Larry David moment. You might have a moment where you walk away saying, oh my gosh, I made a complete ass out of myself. It's fine. We all do that. As long as we realize that that is part of the deal in connecting at any of these levels of connection, it always involves some risk.
Yeah. Well, gosh, there's so much there. I think we could almost do a podcast episode on several of those points that you just talked about. But I want to circle back to a couple of them briefly because I'm really curious about what you think about these. So the first one, let's just go back to work for a moment. Work is an interesting one, and I know this comes up a lot for me in my practice, probably for you too, and most psychologists actually, it comes up a lot, where people come in and they gripe about work. They're dissatisfied with work, they hate their work, they wish they were doing something else, either work-wise or just not working. Work is a touchy subject for a lot of people in terms of their satisfaction, and as you said, if we're working typically to generate an income to live off, we spend quite a bit of our time in our life doing that in one form or another. And it's tough because I think as psychologists, what we want to say is be true to yourself and figure out what it is that you want to do and find some way to do it and be happy. And that's what you did. We talked all about that earlier, about how you realized you needed to become a psychologist. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and you did that. But other people will put up a lot of resistance. You know, they'll say, gosh, I have so many other things going on in my life. I really can't ditch work right now. I've got to continue working, but I just don't like it. So there's some tension there, right? And how do you kind of put that into perspective typically? Because it's not always easy to say, yeah, well, if you don't like your work, go quit and do something else that you like better. And obviously that would be the perfect solution, but people put up a lot of resistance around that in the realities and practicalities of everyday life.
I realize that I was very fortunate to be able to take out a home equity line of credit so that I could earn $10 an hour with no benefits for a number of years while I was working towards my license as a
Yeah.
psychologist. Not everybody has that opportunity. There are many ways of reinvesting in what you're doing. For example, let's say that a person is working at a company whose website ends in the letters .com. I would ask, what can you learn at your job? What do you already love doing at your job that you would want to learn more about while doing your job and getting the good performance reviews that you need and doing well by the company as a part of your professional duty? Amy Resniewski out of Yale School of Management refers to something similar to this as job crafting. It's where you basically deputize yourself to take on responsibilities within that role to learn something new, double down on what you're doing, and study more about it. I mentioned that I probably could not do that selling capital radiological medical equipment. Just was not interesting enough for me to do. When I was a bank teller in graduate school, I hated my job, and unwittingly I was doing exactly what I'm about to describe. And I asked myself, because the 8-hour shift felt like it lasted forever. I was reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl at the time, and he had been through the worst period in human history, the Holocaust. He'd survived Auschwitz. And while he was there, he asked himself, how do I choose what a particular experience means? Having lost all of those freedoms that he'd lost, he was left with one last freedom. Well, if he was able to do that at Auschwitz, I should be able to at least be able to do that at a job I didn't like. So I asked myself, well, where am I going, and how could I learn something more as a bank teller? Well, I see 120 people a day who treat me like a human ATM. And, well, there are 120 different people. They come from all different areas of socioeconomic statuses. They come from all types of societies. Some of them were new to the country, some of them non-native English speakers, some of them soccer moms, some of them judges. What if I could connect with every person I saw? Actually, maybe 119 out of 120. What if I could make 119 out of 120 of them smile during the transaction, if not laugh?
Mm-hmm.
And have a real connection and still balance at the end of the day. I didn't leave the job. I couldn't leave the job. Back then, there were not many jobs that I could do that also would allow me to be a graduate student. Well, I came to love my experience. I experienced a lot of flow. My 8-hour shifts began to feel like 4 hours. Mm-hmm. People would purposely choose me to be their bank teller because they knew me from previous transactions. They thought it was funny. The job itself hadn't changed, but my usage of that job had. I had basically job crafted. I'd made myself into basically the funny bank teller.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us can, with a little bit of thought, a little bit of creativity, exercise that around our jobs.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single job that wouldn't allow for that.
That's a great example, Adam. And I think you talk about that in the book a little bit, if I recall. But I know you've talked to me about that before. Maybe I'm mixing it up. But that's
you remember correctly. You're right.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a really, really great example of how really any situation you're in, you can find a way to reframe it and reshape it in ways that bring you meaning, whether it's a temporary or possibly permanent situation. I really love that example. And also, Adam, I want to say, I think you're being pretty humble that, yes, you did take out the home equity line of credit so that you could support yourself going through graduate school, but that was really hard for you to do. I remember we talked about it, and you were hemming and hawing. You're like, well, I'm not going to have much money while I'm doing this, and I'm going to be able to buy my kids birthday presents and go out to eat, and all of the stuff that we try to do in families was going to be really a stretch for you for a while. So you really did step out of like the normal 9-to-5 comfort zone and took some risks. And you gave me permission. I talk about that with my patients sometimes, using you as an example, who really did something extraordinary for yourself because you wanted to change it. So you're being humble, and I really give you credit for that path you followed, which again, you've well documented in your book, and that was really something.
Well, thanks for that, Aaron. And the way that you actually closed when you had convinced me during our famous sushi dinner was you said that my wife would have my back. And
Yeah.
I remember, and what that actually did was it caused me to remember all of the times that she told me she would have my back, and she did. And so while I do recognize the risk I took and the sacrifices I made, none of that would have been possible without having the wind at my back in the form of my wife. And she just, throughout the years that we were in it was a moment financially and otherwise. What's the word? It was an austere moment. But
Yeah.
she had my back the entire time, just like you said she would, and like she had said she would. So none of us gets there alone.
Well, that was your connection to others there.
That's right.
Yeah. Adam, let's talk about the final area of connection that you discuss, and that's the connection to something greater. And I know you mentioned earlier that's not necessarily religion, although for some people it might be. But let's expand upon that a little bit. You used the word awe too, which I thought was kind of neat. But what is this connection to something greater, and why is that important?
You know, I've been so interested in awe. Awe has been around since the dawn of time, and there have been other terms. One of the terms that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel referred to it as was radical amazement, seeing a sunset and just getting into it and really tripping hard. And we can, because that sunset has never occurred quite the way it's occurring tonight, nor will it occur like that ever again. I remember you and I were eating with somebody in college. You might not remember this moment, but I got really excited about something, and the person across the table said, "Wow, you're really easily impressed." I said, "I'm not really easily impressed. I have a high threshold for appreciation,
Yeah.
but I'm not easily impressed." And I stand by that. I have a high threshold for appreciation, and I think that all of us do, but a lot of us get goofed on, so we can feel a little bit embarrassed. I don't know if you remember the double rainbow guy who was running around. This guy was seeing a double rainbow, and it seemed like he was tripping on MDMA. He's like, "Oh my God, it's a double rainbow." And even South Park kind of clowned on it. But the fact is, he was experiencing awe. And
Yeah.
awe requires a bit of courage to experience, because people could goof on you. We lose our self-consciousness. One of the things that we found as we've put the microscope on the experience of awe is that we're less self-conscious and more socially conscious. We're more, like, let's say it was 2017 when we had the solar eclipse, and people in Oregon had kind of convened in certain places where you could see I forget exactly where it was, maybe it was Eugene in particular, where you could really, really see the solar eclipse. Strangers were hugging each other. This does not happen. And if we were to use brain imagery on awe, what we've also seen is that, very similar to taking in an exogenous substance like psilocybin, which makes us less self-conscious, our brains in awe mimic the movements or the zones that are hit from psilocybin, the psychoactive component in magic mushrooms, without taking any exogenous substance at all. So that's pretty amazing that we could, just by virtue of experiencing wow together, be more bonded. And let's face it, I mean, you know that idea, it's not how many breaths you've taken in lives, but how often your breath has been taken away is like the number of, and I love that idea, because if we can have our breath taken away together, we often feel more bonded. I really encourage people to try to find awe wherever they can.
Yeah. So it's sort of like being just more connected to the universe, sort of, I guess. I mean, the cosmos, which includes people, it includes nature, it includes God or spiritual, if you believe in that. But that feeling of feeling connected to the universe around you, just, it sounds like what you're saying kind of elevates you. It elevates you. It makes you feel just better about being here in the universe, I guess. I mean, is that an okay way to state it?
1,000,000%. I mean, think about it. Gratitude on steroids.
Yeah.
Would be what we appreciate appreciates. If you can imagine somebody saying in Hawaii, "Oh, another day in paradise," it's like, that is a lackluster way of living in Hawaii. If you're going to be in Hawaii, if you can somehow try to see it anew, if you can hit the refresh button and say, wow, that's a Hawaiian sunset, that's amazing. But that doesn't preclude you from saying, wow, I'm in Idaho. That's a beautiful sunset I'm seeing here too. Yeah. The fact that any one of us was born is awe-inspiring in and of itself. The fact, I know it's gross to imagine our parents doing what they did in order for us to be here, but they did it at just the right millisecond for our sperm to win the race out of like well over 1 billion sperm. I forget the exact number. Right. It's 5 billion. It's impossibly low. You have a much better chance of winning at the lottery than being born. But I looked up for the best mathematical approximation of how likely it is that any of us is born. It comes out to 0 is the likelihood of any of us being born. Wow. It was 1 in 10 to the 7.29 millionth power. So if you can imagine 7.29 million zeros, that's approximately how many zeros would be on that lottery ticket. Yeah. And to win the super lotto, I think it's like 1 in a billion or 1 in, I don't know what it is, but you have an infinitesimally better chance of getting, not quite infinitesimally, but nearly infinitesimally better chance of winning the super lottery than being born. That alone is a basis on which we can be grateful and be blown away.
Well, yeah. I know that that I really love cosmology as a field, and just the probabilities of anything existing in the cosmos is just mind-blowingly impossible. Just the fact that there's an Earth that exists that's capable of supporting life, and that life came into existence on Earth, the number of variables that had to, the distance we are from the sun, the gravitational pull of the moon, the fact that we weren't hit by a major asteroid other than the one that maybe created the moon from the Earth at one point, but we needed that, and just all of everything makes it so impossible for us to be here. How could you not be in a state of awe when you recognize that? It really is amazing.
It's utterly amazing.
Yeah. Well, Adam, look, this has been just a really fun and awesome conversation to have. Obviously, reconnecting with you and talking about these topics feels like being back in McConnell, back in Pitzer during a meal, and it's always really fun to connect. I'm wondering, just like in our ending comments here, if you have any final thoughts or things that you'd really like to say to leave us with this topic about connection.
I guess I'd ask for each of us to try to find our unique connection formula. That's really, in this dash between our birth date and our death date, I think that's one of the most important discoveries we can have, and one of the most fulfilling ones with the greatest ROI profile associated with it. Certainly we want to choose good stocks, but let's spend at least as much time choosing our unique paths, our unique formulas to feel connected during this lifetime. There are a lot of things that we don't think about on our deathbed, but one of the things that we do think about is our connections or connections that were left on the table.
Yeah.
So I recommend that we really go for it and try to leave it all on the field as we live.
Yeah, Adam, that's true. And I know you've probably seen this. There's almost nothing sadder than having an older or elderly patient who has lots of regrets about the decisions they made. It's really, really sad. And so I think as psychologists, if we can help people realize that earlier in life so that they can avoid making decisions that they'll regret. And nobody says, when they're dying, I wish I worked a lot more and made a lot more money. Like, that's not usually the regret that you hear. It's usually regrets about not being more connected to one of the 4 areas or more of what you were just talking about. It always comes up that way. So I think you're right. People figuring that out and understanding and realizing it, being conscious of it earlier, will just make their lives so much more fulfilling for them when they know that. So, yeah, thank you for that, Adam. And thanks so much for coming back on the show. It's always great to see you, and we will have to do another one at some point in the future.
Dude, I'd love that. I always love spending time with you, Aaron. We've been friends for a long time, and we were immediately friends to that point. It did not take somebody to explain to me that I should become friends with you. I knew from the second I first met you at that pre-college event that this was a friend. And here we are all these years later.
Yep. Likewise, Adam. Great to see you, and you take care.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for listening to Mind Tricks Radio. I hope you have enjoyed the program. For more information about Mind Tricks, you can go to my website, www.waikikihealth.com. Be sure to subscribe to Mind Tricks on your preferred podcasting host to be notified of new episodes of Mind Tricks. Please take some time to give Mind Tricks a good rating and review wherever you are listening. It really helps get the word out to new listeners. And please like and share Mind Tricks posts on Twitter and Facebook by following your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan.